Does your church have the ability to accept donations that are in cryptocurrency? And once you get that money, what would you do with it? Would you liquidate it? Would you hold on to it? Would you consider that an investment? Hi, my name is Nick Ovaya, and this is the Kingdom One podcast where we grow the church together. And in this episode, we're going to be hearing from our very own Matt Curtis and John Hughes about cryptocurrency and the church. It's weird. Every time I say John Hughes, I just want to hop onto a parade float and start singing Donkey Shane. It's so strange. You're probably a ministry leader or somebody in the pastoral space who wants to see your church win. And here at Kingdom One, we want to do the same thing. That's why we've created something called Above Reproach. It's a free sexual harassment prevention training course for your church. It is biblically based and it is California compliant. That is the hardest compliance to fall in line with. And what we've found is that this is something that is going to keep your ministry safe. It's going to keep your congregation, your staff, and your volunteers safe moving forward. If this sounds like something that would interest you, if you want to save a couple of dollars in the HR space moving forward, go to kingdomone.co/letsgo to sign up for our free sexual harassment prevention training to save you some dollars. And while we're talking about money, I think it's best to hop into today's episode with Matt Curtis and John Hughes about cryptocurrency and the church.
Welcome to the Kingdom One podcast, where we grow the church together. This podcast is here to give you big ideas and help you get practical with the tactical. Here's your host.
Welcome to the Kingdom One podcast. This is the podcast where we grow the church together. This week, we're going to look at some very practical things to think through if you're considering accepting cryptocurrency, or, as we'll learn through the conversation, any other semi-risky investments or donations that your organization receives. So we're going to start the conversation really not with unpacking cryptocurrency. There are a ton of resources out there that exist already that can help you understand what some of these things are. All of them have their own purpose, their own function, their own kind of aspiration to success. And so there's just too many to cover. And frankly, it's largely unnecessary for this conversation. Really, we're going to start with, should your church accept cryptocurrency as a donation? And so this week we have John Hughes, our CFO here at Kingdom One. And for those that don't know, my name is Matt Curtis. I'm over development and a few other things here at Kingdom One. And so this idea of should we accept cryptocurrency is actually an immediate conversation with us as a nonprofit organization as well. Every time the crypto market loses its mind and skyrockets, 5,000% in an hour or whatever, people get really interested in it, in particular nonprofits. They want to know, should we be accepting cryptocurrency? So that's what we're going to land on today. And hopefully you will be able to pull the trigger on actually solving that problem in your own ministry context. So we'll start with that. Should we be accepting this as a church or a nonprofit? John, what do you think?
This is always a tough question because and there's no straight answer to it. It's just going to depend on the church or the ministry. I think it comes down to risk tolerance. There's questions around ethics and the derivation or where those assets are, where they're coming from. And so what is the church's appetite to be engaged in those kinds of transactions? So, for example, a church in the Bay Area may be much more ready to take those on, but the church in Middle America maybe not, because of the environments they're in. So there's no straight answer for anyone, but I think it's important for the churches to start thinking through this now. Ministries think through it today, because there's a lot of questions that need to be answered before the transaction happens. And if they're not answered now, it's going to, in the rush and the flurry of receiving a gift like this, it could bad decisions could be made.
Yeah, it seems like most of the conversations that I'm having are, hey, someone in our congregation wants to give. Yeah. How do we facilitate it? And so there's almost this immediacy of like they're holding this bag of virtual money and they're trying to hand it to me, but there's this wall that keeps popping up. Yeah. So, as you're talking about essentially having some convictions, I have a bias here because I'm not a finance guy at all. And so all of those types of risk things, I'm like, okay, here we go with the risk stuff again, Yeah. But it's a very real conversation to have. What are the assets that we're willing to take on? In a sense, cryptocurrency has its own kind of reputation. I always look at it this way. Have there ever been any illegal things happening with cash? Well, I would say there are. And so to me, I'm like, that's
a great way to say it.
That doesn't hold as much. Yeah. But I think, a little bit of maybe a different way to think of it. Let's say that somebody's donating a car and you don't know what condition it's in.
Yep.
I mean, that's complicated because it may take $3,000 to get that thing up to running to the point where you can even sell it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really about how much risk are we willing to take on as we accept a donation? Is that kind of a fair way to look at it?
Absolutely. And it really is, it's around non-cash transactions. You're right. I mean, cash is, you don't, especially physical cash, you don't know where it necessarily came from, but that is the most liquid, easy form, easy to value and easy to manage. But yeah, anything from real estate, stocks can be that as well. And vehicles, I know vehicles can be a black hole, especially for parachurch ministries that do have vehicle fleets. Your point is spot on. Maintenance, managing it, getting it up to snuff to be able to use it or to liquidate it and sell it. Do you have you have to ask a lot of questions around, is it worth it to us? Do we have the knowledge and know-how to manage this gift well, to turn it into valuable ministry resources, and then for whatever purpose the ministry exists?
Yeah, that's great. We'll talk a little bit more a little later on. I want to kind of talk through this idea of selling or holding, because I think there's some infrastructure that we can build in our organizations that help us navigate that. But I think, the point here really is, if it's a somewhat risky thing, you need to have a decision already in terms of what your tolerance levels are as an organization. And so we'll touch on it more as we go. I think the next really practical question, I guess maybe the conclusion for that, kind of that concept, should a church accept it? I mean, it really is up to the church's risk tolerance. Is that kind of a fair way to?
Yeah. And I would generally encourage a church to try and figure out a way to say yes. Try and figure out how to build a process, a program, or just some infrastructure around the risk management of it. And all we're trying to do is minimize risk. We're never going to fully get away from it, but the more we think about this, the better we think about it, the easier it's going to be to say yes. People have a heart of generosity. They want to see us as the ministry be able to receive that generosity. That's a way we can honor them as individuals and their giftings. So think creatively, think strategically, and don't just say, "Oh no, we don't like crypto. We need to get out of this." There's so many tools, and we'll talk about this, and so many things to think about in a good way that can position you to say yes.
Yeah, I love that as a goal. I've heard that even in the parenting context. If my kid asks me something, I feel like I have to have a good reason to say no. Otherwise, I should say yes. And so, because the temptation always is to drift into like, no. For some reason, that's easier. I don't really know why, because it escalates the situation. Talk about risk management. But that's a great ambition, to try to be able to say yes to as much as you can. So then, at a practical level, one of the things that we've been doing, that John and I have been spending quite a bit of time on, is figuring out what mechanisms we want to leverage as Kingdom One. How do we want to actually do this? So we've decided that we do want to do this. We feel like, I love the language that you're using around this too. If someone has made a lot of money in cryptocurrency, we want to honor that in the sense that that's their bent. You know what I mean? It's the same as like, we don't accept money from people who work in mines, but we do if they work on the railroad. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And so in a sense, this really is our way of saying, like, we want to be able to be funded practically by, the things that people have done. And so if this is a train they hopped on early and they've made a ton of money, then that's fantastic.
Well, and just because we don't understand it shouldn't be the reason not to do it. So we need to go understand it. We need to go understand what's going on and be engaged. And then I think we're less fearful of it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So the things that we've really kind of identified, there are 3 different options that I think we would say are a good starting point to consider how you would accept cryptocurrency in your organization. And each of them really are attached to how much work you're willing to do on your end, how much manpower you have to kind of throw at the problem, and then in a lot of ways, just your tolerance for risk, like we've talked about. And so the 3 different platforms or approaches that we'll talk through, the first is Engiven, which is a relatively new organization that allows nonprofits to accept cryptocurrency donations. Co-Catalyst, that's one that you brought to my attention, John, that it accepts everything in terms of assets. So it's, I guess they probably have a money platform as well.
Correct.
But everything that I was looking at was, stocks, crypto, all that kind of stuff. And then the last one is Coinbase, which is it's a major platform in the cryptocurrency space. It's an exchange. It's where you buy cryptocurrency. And so most people start out on Coinbase when they're going to buy crypto. And so Yeah.
Is
And
that,
actually,
would you say
yeah, go
that's
ahead.
similar to like if the people that think of a stock, in the stock world, that's
Yep.
your brokerage account that whether
Yep.
it be a Robinhood
Yeah,
or a TD
exactly.
Ameritrade, that's what Coinbase is, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can buy crypto now. Coinbase was kind of I would say it was like the original mainstream. So there's
Mhm.
always been exchanges. There've been historical drama with, enjoy the research. It's like a soap opera if you read the history of crypto, but it's not even that old. It's like 10 years old, but man, there've been a lot of drama attached to it.
Sure.
But Coinbase is a great place because it lets you, when you buy your cryptocurrency, you own what is called your keys. And again, I don't want to get into all the details, but that's different than like a Robinhood, where Robinhood will hold your crypto for you.
Mm.
Coinbase lets you actually take your cryptocurrency and store it externally on your own, device, however you want to kind of handle that. But the reason I bring up Coinbase, one, it's an option, but also it's actually a really, really good place to learn about cryptocurrency.
Mm.
They have a really robust education arm. And so if you're looking to try to actually understand what these things are, like John's saying, it's a great place to start. So as we go through these, the first that I mentioned was Engiven. Engiven is cryptocurrency only. There's a 4% fee to liquidate. We'll talk about fees as kind of an important part of all of these things. So what that means is if I give you $100 worth of Bitcoin and then you instantly liquidate it, so it means it'll turn it to cash and then they'll transfer it to your account, they'll take 4% of that.
Mm-hmm.
So in that example, they'll take $4. One of the things that was really intriguing about Engiven for us as we were having this conversation on what we want to adopt is the instant liquidation. So it's kind of a funny time that we're doing this, that we're recording this conversation, because 2 or 3 days ago, I woke up to a text from a buddy of mine that said, everything's down. Like, not
Just
like a little bit down, like 25% down. And I'm thinking, what happened? And so in my head, it was kind of funny because John and I are already talking about this.
Yeah.
And some of the solutions are a little bit more of like, let us know that you want to give money or that you want to give cryptocurrency, and then we'll get back to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm playing out this scenario in my head. It's like, I was going to give you $10,000, but now your gift just lost 25%.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a huge gap. And so the immediacy of liquidation is a real high value for me when it comes to the donation side. So if you're going to be accepting, talking about risk management, I'm a huge fan of letting the donor decide how much they're going to give. Yeah. And so the instant kind of donation approach really lets you let the donor decide how much they're going to give. And the markets now aren't, controlling that. And then if you want to hold, so as we get to strategy a little later on, if you want to hold, you can, and there's no fee for that with Engiven. So that's Engiven. CoCatalyst, you're a little bit more familiar with CoCatalyst, John. Talk to me about what they do. And
and I think the CoCatalyst model could be a great place for a new ministry. Really, in getting out of just normal cash giving, could be a great place to start. They facilitate the entire transaction, very simple to set up, and you basically work with them. And they're Bay Area company started by, I believe, a guy in the tech space. Obviously, it's where everybody comes from in that area. But and they provide a really white hand treatment to the donor, or white glove. I'm sorry, not white hand, white glove treatment. To help them send the gift in, monetize it, turn it from whatever asset it is in what form, usually, again, stocks, equities, hard to value assets, and then cryptos, and then convert that to cash and get it to the ministry. The plus side of this is that they take care of all the donor acknowledgments. They themselves are the not-for-profit, so they acknowledge the gift. They report it to the IRS. It's nothing that the ministry has to do, and I think it's important for a ministry to understand that if you want to get into stock, getting gifts of stock or equities or things like this, you need to have, whether it's an account like Coinbase or a Charles Schwab account, you have to set that up. You have to have a board. You have to go through all of the banking regulations that are necessary to establish those accounts, maintain those accounts, and transact that business. So if you're a one-man shop or just a very small ministry that wants to be able to position yourselves for this, that's a lot of work, takes a lot of knowledge and know how to navigate the system well and efficiently. Whereas a Co-Catalyst, man, you sign up and within 5-10 minutes, you got the button on your website and you're ready to receive gifts, and they take care of it all for you. And really that the price that they offer it at 2.75, that's their cap. I mean, they are, from my understanding and talking with people that have utilized them before, they really work hard to keep that cost down because they recognize these are dollars that go back into the not-for-profit space, and they're just really trying to cover their costs. And at 2.75% plus some transaction fees, it might actually be cheaper to do that than to use your own team or staff, unless you have a volunteer base that can handle it. This could actually be a very cheap option for you, even though if you're thinking about 2.75% plus transaction fees, that's a lot. You're going to pay transaction fees no matter what, depending on the platform you're utilizing. And 2.75%, again, that covers the cost of labor, covers the cost of time. As one who's done consulting before and in this space, my times are going to be a lot more expensive than 2.75 on $5,000. I'll guarantee that. So I think that's a great entry level place and where a lot of ministries and churches, if they need to get into this, can live.
Yeah, that's a great starting point. I think, even as we're thinking through the scale of your organization, that's really the factor that determines a lot of this. There's a tendency in the church space to say, hey, so-and-so's doing this, or, oh, did you see this big old church over here? They're doing that. Well, the reason they're doing that is because it's either compatible with their systems and infrastructure, or they have the manpower. I mean, you can't compare the details and nuances of circumstances just by looking at the tool that people are using. Right. And so that's really why we do take the agnostic to technology or agnostic to tools, approach. But that's even why we're having this conversation, because, what InGiven might do for one organization, Co-Catalyst is actually going to do better for another, and vice versa. And the church,
one of the churches I know that's in that is a really large church. They're big, like they're not small by any means. They have people that have the ability to do this and know how. But we got to remember, like churches and ministries, our lanes are not finance. Our lanes are not investing. And so to be able to keep the church focused on what's necessary, not get distracted by these other things, there's other tools like this out there, but I think that's the bigger picture. Let's not get distracted from our mission and ministry by some of these tools. Now, if you're a $30-40 million organization with a $10 million investment portfolio, totally different conversation.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. That even leads a little bit to Coinbase and what it is. You can create an account on Coinbase and you can do all the custodial stuff and the management of the cryptocurrency on your own. Yeah. There is a little bit of expertise that's needed that may or may not be common in your church, And so if the starter of one of these coins goes to your church, then okay, maybe you have the volunteer you need to be able to do self-custodial and navigate all that stuff.
Lucky you.
But, yeah, right. But if you're listening to this podcast saying, like, keep saying cryptocurrency and how is that different than crypto? Like, then that skill set's not, that's not the right solution for you to go as manual as possible. And so Coinbase is a third option. If you feel that you are savvy in this space or you feel comfortable kind of getting into that, they have a corporate, basically their Coinbase business. At one point they were working on nonprofit stuff that was harder to find on the site. In my recent searches, they've gone public, and so they're a different organization today than they were prior to going public. And so, it's a place that you can look into in terms of trying to minimize all fees at all costs. But you really have to keep in mind, like John's saying, like the amount of time that it takes to save money is usually very costly. Yeah. So it's, I'm a big fan of these platforms that do a lot of that work for you. I want to be able to receive these gifts, but I don't want to have to then do all of the legwork that essentially burns through the value of the gifts just by receiving them. So,
and you're right with that instant liquidation. We'll come to that, but that's a huge asset. Like I think that the cost, when I think let's define that a little bit. The instant liquidation means that you're not susceptible to the ups and downs of the market, and so a 4% fee to get instant liquidation, while you may lose on maybe some transactional dollars, you may save yourself 5, 6, 7, 8% depending on the a 2-day change in the market. That's right. So that's really, really important.
Yeah. And in case it's not clear, cryptocurrency is really approached like a currency. And so really think of it like you're trading from euros to dollars. And so if I'm giving Bitcoin, I'm trading from Bitcoin to dollars. And so the liquidation is, as soon as I submit my donation to the organization, it is then converted to dollars from whatever currency. So from Bitcoin to dollars. And that happens instantly as soon as I, submit. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about instant liquidation.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that it's being converted. We're at the teller window in the airport,
Great way to put it.
Yeah. Ripped off on our, on our exchange or whatever. But yeah, that's what that's about. And that's a value we'll get to in just a second. The other thing I just wanted to touch on briefly, in a lot of these different types of solutions, there are fees. And, we've talked about percentage of this, percentage of that, this kind of transaction fee. You really want to be attentive when you're choosing a solution, because there are some that look very good on paper, but as you dig deeper, they're not as good. And those are not the three that we talked about. There are some others that are fairly popular that, as I've looked into them, their fees are exorbitant.
Mm-hmm.
And so their transaction fees are really low, but then there's a monthly fee, or there's no monthly fee, but then the transaction fees are really high. And so you're really you're trying to collect all of the fees when you're making this assessment. So what is it that is the total cost that you're looking at? And so as I was looking, the things that I found were monthly fees. So there's a subscription that goes to, this organization, whatever, it's $25 a month to have a whatever account. So that's a subscription fee or a monthly fee. Then there's your transaction fee. So in the case of Given, it's 4% if you're liquidating. In the case of CoCatalyst, it's at most 2.75%. So those are those transaction fees. Or and then there, on top of that, then there's the cost of transaction itself. And so there will be a cost even within Given, even with CoCatalyst, just the transaction of money, the ACH transfer. There's going to be a small fee that's attached to that.
It's the banking costs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. What crypto's rebelling against is these silly, these silly banking costs. But I think those are just the fees that we've looked at and that we've seen as we're going through it. And so just be attentive to the fact that you're going to want to spend a little bit of time glancing through contracts. Yeah. You're going to want to spend some time really looking at, the way I look at it is I look at multiple pages on the website, find the pricing page, but then look and see if there's a tier beyond the $25 a month that also says 7%. And,
all that little fine text at the bottom of the website, read that.
That sounds terrible.
That's where it's all hidden.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, because people like me are afraid of that section of the website.
Right.
So, but as you're looking to get into something like this, just know, and the three that we mentioned, and Given, CoCatalyst, and Coinbase, there weren't hidden fees that we had found. Right. They were very upfront and they're very clear. And we read through the small print, the very tiny print, and so that's a piece of why they're even a part of this conversation. But if you're looking for something that's different than these three, just make sure that you're doing your due diligence, as they say. Okay, so the big question, I think, is we've won the day. All of the churches and organizations that are listening to this have now signed up to something, and they're able to accept cryptocurrency. So do we hold it, or do we hodl it, as the insiders say, because it's going to the moon, or do you sell it? What is your thought in terms of, we're thinking risk management, we're thinking, honestly, we're just thinking wisdom. We're thinking fueling our organizations, because at the end of the day, giving isn't just so that we line pocketbooks. Giving it's the fuel that powers the change that our organizations are hoping to accomplish in this world.
Right. Yeah. And there's so many ways we could go in talking through this. So, if you're a small organization, you need those dollars in the bank, low risk, low volatility, not changing from day to day. That's your game. Get out of it. Don't hold it. Don't play the market. I mean, if you're an organization that has an appetite for investing in, keeping some dollars for growth or income yields, things like that, usually not-for-profits take a very risk-adverse approach. They have a very narrow strategic focus on how to manage their assets to achieve the goals that they want to achieve. Now, a larger institution, higher education, foundations, things like that, they may want to hold if given, because they've got that depends on really what the donor's intent with the gift. They may say, look, I want you to have this $200, $500 million, but you can't use it for 10 years, or it needs to be, I want the income off of this to go towards scholarships or something like that. Well, then you have a little bit more of a broader time horizon, maybe a little higher tolerance to grow the assets. But in the case of Bitcoin, that may not be a great option because it doesn't spin off income. You can take a higher risk investment that's going to give you an annual yield 10, 12, 15%, because it's a heck of a lot better than the 0.3 that you're going to get in your savings account. And that's where you would probably find a hold strategy. So my just unsolicited opinion is get it, get rid of it. Don't hold it. It's not worth it. I've just looking this morning, it's down 6%. That's a huge hit to any gift if you're holding the portfolio, and it brings it's not a great way to honor the giver in the amount that they give. So if they are giving these resources to the ministry and with the understanding that they're going to be deployed and used for that missional purpose, then let's get it into the form of a functional value. Doesn't just have to be dollars, but something that's a bit more tolerable or risk adverse, that's going to help propel the ministry forward. Because if we just lose money to the daily fluctuations of the market, that's probably not going to be good stewardship.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. So for me, I come at it from just the individual, like I'm interested in cryptocurrency perspective. The fluctuations for those that hold cryptocurrency are a part of the game.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, I mean, in fact, we're so warped in our thinking that we'll just say, "Oh, Bitcoin's on sale today." Like that's the way that these major dips are perceived by many in the yeah, we're not CFOs. I mean, maybe some are, I don't know, but what's interesting is that is a kind of counter position to the way I think. So when I put on my Kingdom One hat, I look at it the opposite. I look at it as I really want to liquidate this as quickly as possible, because we're not in the business of investing in kind of financial things. Like I'm looking at how much money could be. So if someone gives us a Bitcoin, whatever the value is, because I would check, but it doesn't matter because it'll change so quickly, but whatever that amount of money is, in my head, I think, man, how much ministry can we deploy?
Yeah.
How many more, we're in the midst of this major R&D project, which I'm super excited about. We're going to be kind of talking about that more in the future, but that's going to be a real tangible, practical benefit to the Capital C Church. Well, us holding Bitcoin's not. So that it's just off mission for us.
Yeah.
And so that for me is really that filter to push me towards that instant liquidation side. Even though I'm comfortable in the space of cryptocurrency individually, I just think organizationally, I don't love it from that perspective.
There's so much conversation around the economics of it too. And one of the challenging things that I think, if you're new to even the investing space, and there's been so much attention on this in the last 5 months, thank you to GameStop, but is that what is the value behind it? I mean, that being able to be knowledgeable, and I think there's a great point for a disclaimer here. We're not advising anything. Like we're not telling you to do anything, or we're not advisors in this space. So get advice, get help. I mean, even to try and do it on your own is risky. This is a risky thing to do. So, if you follow anything from Berkshire Hathaway, Charlie Munger's the right-hand man of Warren Buffett, he's like anti-crypto because from an economist standpoint, there's nothing behind it. It's a perceived value instead of real value. As much whether you like Ford or GM or whatever, they're actually making something. Even Tesla, like Tesla's doing something that has value, that creates the value of that equity. Bitcoin is a little bit different in that regard. So, and that's where the difference comes into play, and the tolerance. And personally, I probably won't put money in Bitcoin. I'm not a fan of it for a lot of those reasons, but that's okay. It's a personal decision. But so institutionally, as you're thinking as an organization, you've got to be even way more sensitive to those things, because it's all part of your image and what people perceive about you. So little side tangent.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, and I love it. I think that's a super kind of a rational take, and I do think it applies to all assets, frankly. I mean, I think if too much real estate is being held by a church, like that's weird.
Yeah.
Like, are you planning on building there? Like, is that like the future home? Like, I don't really understand why you're holding these things on your, on your ledger or whatever. Like it's
called a balance sheet.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. In cryptocurrency, it's called a ledger. So yeah.
Still goes on the balance sheet.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Yeah. But like those are the kinds of things where you really want to figure out what is the mission of the organization, what are we trying to accomplish, and does holding this really help us or not? Right. And so those are I even as I think through it, I can't really think of a time when I would recommend holding to an organization. Now, there are for-profit businesses that are a different conversation, but when it comes to an organization that is fueled, the ministry is fueled by the donations of people, I don't understand where we wouldn't kind of instantly liquidate. But again, that's your call to make with your crew of people, you know?
And I think it may be something to have clearly spelled out, so that if a donor comes to you and says, I want to give you crypto, you say, great, here's our practice, here's our methodology around it and what we do. And they may say, oh, that's so great, we love it. Or, hey, I'd love for you to be able, then it's a conversation. I think these kinds of gifts are not transactional, like somebody passing the plate in your church. These are the people you have relationships with, you should be talking to and understanding what's going to happen, because they need to understand it. You need to understand it. You may even want to know, like, where did you come up with this, or how did you get it? That may be a fair question to ask. But at the other side of it, they may come back and say, oh, I'd rather see you hold it for a year and then sell it. Then I think then the conversation, then it's a different conversation. And then maybe you do hold it for that purpose. But that, again, that's a tangent, and that's probably going to be an isolated incident.
Yeah. And those are really the one-on-one conversations. At the end of the day, those who hold crypto are comfortable with the risk of it. Yeah. And so in a lot of ways, to me, I'd probably have that conversation and just say, well, you know what, how about you keep holding it then and come back to us in a year, rather than putting that.
Right. And the tax implications, and I know I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit. If it gets volatile, they're able to give, I think, on the basis of their actual buying basis. So it's called the cost basis. So if they buy crypto at 30 grand today and it shoots up to 40 grand, they give it tomorrow or the next day, they're still giving what to them is $30,000 of asset. I think it allows them to avoid, or I don't know, I have to go back and double check my knowledge on this. The donor's going to be mindful of the tax implications on their side, basically.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. And that's really kind of the last kind of element of this is, what are the reporting and the tax implications of a gift like this? And it really is common across multiple assets that are not, cash. And so that's the last piece of it. I will say, sort of as a caveat, again, a part of why we recommend, 2 out of the 3 would be, in Givin or CoCatalyst, is that they're navigating those things for you and with you. And so you're not sort of hung out to dry. If you're going the Coinbase route where you just do this all on your own, good luck. Like there's a lot of implications in terms of reporting and all of that, even for the individual. I mean, the theory behind a lot of cryptocurrency is that you buy it, it goes up in value, and then you're just spending off of it. Well, every time you're spending, it's a tax complexity. Mm-hmm. And so it's a really terrible way to do day-to-day transactions. And so maybe that changes if legislation changes, but functionally right now, it's just not a day-to-day spend that's tax friendly. And so you're stepping into that space, in a way. Large transactions, that's a lot easier, because you're now not saying, what did I spend for Starbucks 4 months ago? I think I spent was it Bitcoin or was it Dogecoin? Like what? I don't even remember what it's a mess to navigate all that. And so when it comes to the reporting side, obviously we love these organizations that are helping do the heavy lifting with us. But anything, from your perspective on the reporting?
Yeah. And I'll just, some of this is just big picture. You need to do this in any case, anytime you get a gift, not of cash, is you need to receive, you're going to obviously want to acknowledge that gift to the donor, or that donor is going to need some type of acknowledgement. And because it's not cash, it's not the ministry's place to value it. So even if they gave you 100 shares of Apple today, you don't say thank you for 3,000 or whatever the value is of that $300,000 contribution. You say thank you for 100 shares of Apple on such and such a day. It's, we do not place a value on it. That's up to you based on the transaction timing and all that stuff. So we acknowledge as ministries the quantity of the gift, not the value of the gift, because that requires appraisals. It requires a set of knowledge that we would then have to be able to assign a value to it. Now that's the case for real estate. That's the case for boxes of t-shirts. That's the case of anything that's not cash related. However, especially in the vehicle space, and this is where real estate or real property starts to come into play, and I think crypto is starting to fall into this, is there is some tax filing information that you do have to send off to the IRS that says, we did receive this. approximate value was over $5,000 or it's $5,000, $6,000, and then that donor gets a copy. Copy goes off to the IRS. So there are tax reporting requirements to acknowledge to them the transaction of real property. So those are the two major implications. As far as whether it's income tax or things like that, there really isn't much tax implications or reporting implications on a day-to-day basis when you receive these kinds of gifts. Now, if you're in an organization that requires an audit or a financial statement review, then you're going to have different reporting requirements. I will not go too far into that, but there's 3 layers that you have to be able to report the fair market value of assets. Layer 3 is the most difficult. It gets as they get easier, you move up to level 1. And so if you do have an audit, you are getting into this space, consult with your CPA firm, let them know what you're planning on doing. I think it's wise to get ahead of it. Don't wait until they show up for audit field work and you're like, oh, by the way, we have 100 Bitcoin and we don't really know what we're doing. It's going to be a mess because they're not only going to look at how you transacted the gift, they're going to have to start looking at your internal control environment, some of your process and policy documents. It's going to be a whole different ball game. So this is going back to where we started. Plan ahead, think ahead, answer the questions today. And I think one of the other things that maybe this kind of circles back a little bit on that buy hold. If you find yourself going into the hold space, talk with your board. Make sure your board's on board with that. No pun intended. But a hold, if you're in a hold world and you want to hold assets and trade on them, that's fine. But typically the board's going to want to establish an investment committee. The investment committee is going to need a set of documents. It's called the investment policy statement. That is going to talk about how, what, and when all the transactions occur. It is the game plan for managing a portfolio. And that is a very, very important process to go through. And for a board, they have fiduciary responsibility. They need to be in the know on all of these things. So board members, leaders of ministries, please keep your governing body informed, because they are the ones in the eyes of the state in the law that carry the fiduciary responsibility for all these things. So don't put them in a bind.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it sounds like the highest priority with any of this stuff is just being transparent with your team, with your board, making sure that your donors have a very clear understanding of your practices. I think sometimes we fall into this space of, I would just kind of call it a scarcity mindset, where we're so worried that we're not going to get enough that when somebody comes to us with a donation, we say, well, we'll figure out how to make it work. Yeah. When the reality is that's going to back you into corners that maybe you don't want to be backed into.
Correct.
And so by having this overt conversation ahead of time, hey, how do we feel about cryptocurrency in terms of receiving it? Mm-hmm. Are we good with that? Okay. Who do we need to be in conversation with to make sure that all of our decisions being made in the building of accepting process, how do we make sure everybody's on the right page? Yeah. And so the instant liquidation helps with removing a lot of the complexity of long-term strategy. When do we sell, all of that? And so that's a pretty easy and simple way, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't include these parties still, mm-hmm. because they need to be involved in that process, because it helps them really, own the responsibility that is theirs, which is, to care for these areas. Yeah. So one thing that we've kind of danced around, but I just want to say it overtly, because we were talking the other day as we were kind of preparing for this. And I think it's such a great insight. The role of risk management, really often, not always, but often, the more you pay, the more risk that others are willing to incur.
Correct.
And so as you're thinking about that, that really applies to most tools. So if you're going with a website provider or builder, the more you pay often means they're going to do more heavy lifting, whether that be through support when you break something, maybe they're building modules for you, whatever it is. And so the same is true here. If you're going with an organization that does pay more money, we keep looking at the bottom line. What's the lowest percentage? Mm-hmm. What's the lowest fee? So even the companies that I've mentioned where they have a really high fee, there might be a real value for that fee. And so don't be scared off by these initial numbers. Instead, think through what is it that this organization's doing, not in terms of even just the functional like paperwork, mm-hmm. but what risk are they managing for you, or are they carrying for you?
Well, and to connect the dots, and a lot of people don't really recognize this, that's what insurance is. That all your insurance is the movement of the risk of an issue or the financial risk of an issue onto somebody else. And so there's that. If you're thinking in that space, there's like, well, and unfortunately we're required to have work comp, or in some places required to have our building insurance, but we keep those things. We pay a small amount or a portion of money so that we don't get hit with something really, really expensive down the road. And so it's just the movement of risk onto somebody else. And then again, that we can save that for a whole nother podcast. That's a really fun topic, and how to leverage, and these are tools. And so how do we leverage these tools for ministry protection and ministry creation? So yeah, don't pay too much. You want to be able to know what you're paying for. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the more you pay, the less work you're going to have to do, and the lower risk is involved.
That's great. Yep. So that's what we have in terms of kind of helping break down the thinking around should you get involved in the being able to receive. I know I've gotten a handful of questions about this from different churches, and I feel like the best way to resolve that is to just share what we know in terms of how you go about that process. And so if there are questions that we didn't answer, obviously reach out to us, connect us on socials, Kingdom One, or my email is matt@kingdom1.co, john@kingdom1.co. And so we're happy to kind of help navigate this space. It's a real interesting space. And when the market's up, it's an exciting space. And when the market's down, it's a tragic space, but it's exciting, and there's always something to talk about.
It's definitely evolving every day. Even in the CPA land, we get notifications and all kinds of stuff about how to account for these things. So it is a new frontier for us.
Kingdom One family, thanks for stopping by for another podcast. Today has been such a learning experience. My biggest takeaway was understanding there are third-party applications that are going to allow you to translate your cryptocurrency that understands the tax implications and also the reporting. This is so huge. So don't do this alone. There are some links in the show notes that will allow you to check out those third-party applications so your church can be safe, secure, and reporting these things properly. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for the podcast, you can email me directly at nick@kingdom1.co. Just also consider me your plug for anything Kingdom One oriented. We love to hear from you. We're so glad that you're tuned into this podcast. And finally, if you would give us a rating wherever you're listening to this, this would help other ministry leaders find this resource as well. Until we chat again, let's grow the church together.